Oh, Tina, explain the community code. All right, well, get a pen. So the community code, and for any of you who are grabbing a ticket, this is all unpacked very slowly for you. It's one of our bonuses. But the essence of the community code is this. So over the years of working in communities, we've come to find that what leads to a healthy community is effectively an answer to two questions. We talked a lot about this one today. People need to know, do I belong? Right? The second question people need an answer to, and you'll realize instantly how practical this is once they know they belong, how do we behave around here? Right? Now, if you allow me, I'm just going to add a layer of distinction. When we say, how do we behave? What we're talking about is actually I'm going to be a little more technical here. When we say how to behave, what we're talking about is actually how do we give and receive value? And how do we create cycles of giving and receiving? Okay? There's a reason we use that language. So we refer to it, Tina, as the community code because over about 10 years, I stood on the stages of community after community after community. And I don't riddle this workshop with all the stories and case studies. I probably should do more of that. But if you can trust that I'm coming from a place of having just been in the room hundreds of times and watched and noticed, here's why these communities are healthy and here's why these are not. There was a point about 4 years ago where this framework just became so glaringly obvious to us. And what we found is that you can actually reverse engineer how to create collective well-being by understanding a few basic things about a group of people. So one of them is these two arrows here, these two axes. These axes represent two different relationships. So this axis represents, I'm going to put M to M. What does that mean? That means how do our members relate to each other? Member to member. Okay? Really straightforward. If you're all a part of a community, you're all at my gathering. How do I have you connecting with each other? I mean, that's the heart of what we teach at Exchange. This relationship here is actually a vertical relationship. And do you see why I call this one the horizontal relationship? This is member to member. This is community to member, which is, think about this as a vertical relationship. Like you all are here because of Jordan. Well, you have some relationship with whatever the purpose is of whatever Jordan's community does. Let's call that a vertical relationship, right? You have a relationship with Jordan's community. We're going to call that a vertical relationship. Now, watch how interesting this is. There's 4 different contributors that actually help to answer these two questions across the two relational dimensions. Do I belong? The single most important thing when it comes to how members relate to each other is we need to know how to create psychological safety. We talked about that today, right? The number one way that people experience safety is through how we gather. That is one of the most direct ways for people to know they belong, especially in their biology. But there's another dimension of belonging, which has to do with my vertical relationship with the community that I'm a part of, which is what's the bigger story of this community? Now, we didn't talk about this directly today, but you know that case study that I showed you all a few minutes ago? I showed Brian the example of co-creating an answer to our shared purpose. What are we doing there? We are unearthing, we are creating a shared answer to what's our bigger story for being in this room, which starts to reveal, oh, there's interesting ways for people to be connected to that story. I don't have to tell the story. I invite them to co-create it. That's kind of neat, right? And there's obviously more to this. This is just the framework. What about behaving? Well, when it comes to member, the question we have to ask is, What are the different ways that we enable members to share value between each other? Now, here's the beautiful thing. You can come through our trainings and you can get just so many examples. You'll build a community off of our training for the rest of your community. It's everything we do is techniques that build community through how people gather. Here's the good news. If you can't come through our trainings, what you saw us do today, don't forget, every small group interaction has the potential to be an experience of giving and receiving. It just comes down to, do you design for that and facilitate for that? That's the cool thing, is we humans actually want to create value with and for each other. So if we know the right questions and choreographies to get it going, and even if we mess up a little bit and we're not perfectly smooth, they'll actually make it valuable during the 2 minutes, the 8 minutes, because of their own self-interest. So sharing value, you just need to know how to create the conditions for that. And then there's lots of different ways, different activities you can run to do that, right? The last one is the least obvious. And this is called stewardship. And this is really the future of building community. This is the differentiator that most community builders will maybe hardly ever touch. What do we mean by stewardship? So stewardship is, so if sharing is how members give and receive value, to each other, stewardship is how do you create vehicles for members to give back to the whole community? Now, I could give you lots of our own examples, but here's the bottom line. It starts by asking that question. Am I creating ways? So here's one way. One way is you invite your students to come share their story with all the rest of your students. That's stewardship. That's community service. That's giving back. You start to notice really quickly that that's even more important than the stuff we teach, because it gives people the confidence and the courage to realize I might be able to do it too. And there's lots of ways you can have your students share their learnings with the rest of your students. Another example of stewardship, remember the whole story I told you about that summit I led for Facebook? Well, even though that's a company, the most powerful lessons about community actually come from understanding how to create the essence of community, even inside of a company. So guess what? That whole Facebook story, we have communities co-create shared values all the time. That's an example of stewardship. Have your participants early on co-create. Let's create our own values around here. I could give you multiple communities right now, entrepreneurial mastermind groups that are thriving, that in the last 5 to 10 years, their founders came through our training and realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to have my members very early on answer questions like, who do we want to be for each other? Or even answer questions around, what's our vision for our community? What's our vision for how we can help each other out? Watch what happens when you ask your members that question instead of thinking you have to figure it out. That's stewardship. That's neat stuff. This is the community code, and obviously these were answers to how do we behave across 2 different relationships. Does this answer everything you ever need to know about building healthy community? No, but what I would argue is if you show me a community that's thriving, I will show you how what they are doing is honoring that framework right there. People feel like they belong and they are behaving in healthy ways. Tina, you asked the question, so I drew the circles and the arrows and the lines. Is that helpful?
Holy Toledo.